Bill ya ana menyuwea piye nyep mat helpeya mak kul hui set poking ya chama thau mayum nyuwe kamich piye nyakatosh enya kawa kiwek piye nyakanab mayum nyuwe pam piye nyapom nyuwe kanab nye mayum nyahiku wiyu piye nyuwe nuwop mayum ja maya khanya wachu nyet wucho nyuwe nyuwop nyupum kweshlap nyepu wasm pe nyuwe nyahilikui pugnaches nyep hiku nyamathau shuhu mapa nyamat shuhu mapa nyamat shuhu mapa mayum nyuwe kwa nyeptes nyakanat ma nyuwe now mau nyuwe the khan nyuwe spear nyaites ye khan. Ladies and gentlemen, I welcome all of you here to this land that we call Matkulahui, the place of the caves. It is known today as La Jolla. This land which is sacred land to our people, the Ipai, the Tipai, the Kumeyaay people. This territory, this land that we are a part of, this ocean is sacred to us. We have been here time immemorial. We have village sites that are under the Pacific Ocean. On the other side, into the desert, we have fish trap sites that are now desert. It speaks to our people that we are no strangers to climate change. But we've come here to talk about the critical mission studies. When people came and they wanted to build what they call a false house of God in order to steal our souls, steal our bodies, and steal our land. But what we say today is we will not allow that to happen. We have never been conquered, and we never will be. We fought then, we fought today, and we will fight in the future. When we all come together, we learn from each other. So again, I just wanted to say welcome to everyone who has come here today. And we all have something to teach each other. We all take that learning, we take that back to where we came from. And we all stand together. Thank you very much, and welcome again. Menyuwea piyi nyepmat ipe. Welcome to the land of the Kumeyaay. Yechan. Thank you.
Hey folks, I'm Ross Frank, professor in ethnic studies, and I want to welcome you as well. I have a missive from the chair of ethnic studies, Andrew Jolivet, who says, Yitul wejos que sakus, good day relations. I thank and acknowledge the Critical Mission Studies program, the Kumeyaay Nation, and Luis Miranda Ramirez of Ohlone, Costanoan, Esselen Nation, a dear friend and Bay Area relative who I have known for several years. Of course, she's down there with Iya, the Esselen Remember, finishing the rehearsal for tonight's performance. The weekend's events and this play are a testament to the important work of cultural remembrance, tribal stewardship, and indigenous California Indian thrivance today and into the future. I want to welcome you all on behalf of the Department of Ethnic Studies and on behalf of the Native American Indigenous Studies program here at UC San Diego. Hiweyo Mesi, thank you for this sacred and ceremonial work. Andrew Jolivet, Department Chair, Ethnic Studies. So that's our official welcome. And you'll notice that we don't have the chancellor here, and we don't have a provost here or a dean here. You just have me, a professor in ethnic studies, doing the welcome, right? I mean, there's a reason for that, because this is not a welcome. We are not welcoming you. We are welcoming us. We have all built this critical mission studies program. We have worked for 3 years here. We had the very first meeting here at UCSD, is sort of a pre-meeting to try to figure out how to organize this large project. And we are talking about a group of 4 co-PIs, Raina Ramirez from UC Santa Cruz, who just had a granddaughter the day before yesterday, which is why she isn't here. Congratulations. We have Charlene Villasenor Black, who is probably streaming, looking at the streaming here from University of Oxford, where she has a year there. Hello, Charlene. And then we have Jennifer Shepherd-Hughes, who is here from UC Riverside, and myself, the 4 co-PIs. We also have 4 California Indian research partners, Jonathan Cordero, who you're going to hear from in a minute, Eve Chavez at UCSC, and Val Lopez, who's in the back of the room here. And 1, 2, 3, who did I miss? And Stan, who you just, he's the principal, the host. Well, what have you. This is part of the Welcoming Us. The Critical Mission Studies project has 15 advisory members, California Indian folks from all over the state. Sometimes it's 12, sometimes it's 15. There have been a few board members who have gone on to other things. And then we have, 28 research and community-initiated projects that are part of the California Mission Studies. Again, that part of us, that's over 60, probably more like 80 different people who are involved in those projects in various ways. So that's the us that we are welcoming here to UC San Diego today. We had our first meeting to organize the structure that would grow into Critical Mission Studies here on February 23rd, 2019. It was in a conference room just up the road a bit near Ethnic Studies. And, at that meeting, we were advised to have a large open meeting to invite everyone who was interested in critical mission studies and anyone that anyone could think of. We had a whole bunch of pre-planning meetings at UC Riverside, and that meeting happened on March 29th, 2019. Now, when we met here in 2019 to plan critical mission studies, this was a 10-acre surface parking lot where you are sitting now. So in my mind, we have built a similar kind of edifice for critical mission studies. We've built a network of people. It's not quite as visible as this edifice, but it's something that stretches across the state and into people who are working on issues that have to do with changing the narrative about California in relation to the missions and all the subsequent issues and problems and traumas that it's caused. That is the edifice that the Critical Mission Studies has been building for the last 3 years, sometimes visibly and sometimes invisibly. All of you are a part of that. And tomorrow at the conference, we're going to hear what people have been doing as a part of this movement. And, Critical Mission Studies comes on the heels of a generation of activism among California Indians to change the narrative in every respect, in terms of the archival research, in terms of the voice, in terms of the telling of the public story, and in terms of telling the truth about the actual mission period and the way in which that inflected everything else that happened in California in relation to indigenous people. That's the story that we're here to change. and we are all part of doing that. So welcome us here to UC San Diego as part of that building the new edifice for telling the truth and telling the real story and changing the narrative about the way in which indigenous people and California have been twins since time immemorial. Thank you very much. And now I am going to introduce our keynote speaker. For some reason, I neglected to print out the stuff that I'm supposed to say, so it's on my little phone here. All right. Jonathan Cordero, one of the 4 California Indian research partners in critical mission studies. Ramatush Aloni Shumash, he's the founder and executive director of the Association of Ramatush Aloni. He is now a visiting professor at UC Hastings in the Indigenous Law Center, a visiting scholar at the Spatial Science Institute at USC, California Indian research partner in critical mission studies here. His research revises previous scholarship on California Indian and Spanish relations during the mission period, and he also works as a consultant in both the public and private sectors, especially in the arts, and serves as a leader, speaker, and activist in the broader Ohlone and Chumash communities. He's also become a friend of many of us during the last 3 years and has been one of the intellectual and energetic leaders of critical mission studies. Let me welcome Jonathan Cordero.
Energetic is really code for something else, by the way. Haku, haku, horshatuhi. Those are greetings in both Chumash and Ramaytush Ohlone languages. And I just want to start by saying I'm really grateful to be here in Kumeyaay territory. So thank you, Stan, for hosting us. And really honored to be asked to offer this keynote address. I actually want to start by thanking our co-PIs who were mentioned earlier, Charlene Villasenor-Black at UCLA, Jennifer Hughes at UC Riverside, who should actually change her job and be an event planner. And Reina Ramirez from UC Santa Cruz, and of course Ross Frank here from UC San Diego. Over the years, I've worked on many projects with non-natives and with California natives, and I have been really impressed how deferential they've been to us California Indians, how they've facilitated and not controlled, and how they really just stayed out of the way and helped us get some really important work done. It's a beautiful thing you've done, and I'm really grateful. Ross gave you some of my background, so I'll skip some of that, but I did want to talk a little bit about my positionality today. In addition to being from 5 different tribal groups in California and having my degrees, about 15 years ago, I came to the realization that as a California Indian with a PhD, that I had an obligation to contribute to scholarship on California Indians. And so I combined my skills as a professional genealogist with my training as a social scientist to become an ethnohistorian. And I chose to study the mission period for a lot of the reasons that we all do, because so much of the scholarship was just inherently biased, really lacked methodological and theoretical sophistication. And because with a few notable exceptions, California Indian perspectives, experience, and knowledge were severely limited or conspicuously absent. One more thing you should know about me, I am cursed or blessed with knowing intuitively when people are being misleading and dishonest. It's not a party trick, so don't test me later. I am critical of everything. I have a very strong commitment to social justice. Makes me very highly critical and demanding of proof of other scholars and other people's truth claims, especially when I know that they know that they're being dishonest. That's one of my pet peeves, by the way. And for that and other reasons, I place a high value on honesty and integrity. And oh, by the way, I am not perfect. Ross, can we get the, I can't even see what slide's up.
Yeah, you'll have to look at the monitors because we're washed out on the sun here.
Yeah, okay, so I can see the one in the back. So go to the second slide, please. These are the Chumash cave paintings in Santa Barbara. I want to tell you a story. This story was shared by Fernando Labrada, who is actually one of my great cousins. His great-grandfather and my 7th great-grandmother were first cousins. This is a story that's usually told over the course of 2 days. It has tremendous cosmological and spiritual significance. It is not, those elements are not for sharing in public. So I'm only sharing effectively the moral of the story here. Sort of like an indigenous Aesop's fable, although it's not a fable. Coyote was from Siktun, which is one of my Chumash villages of origin. One day he was baking clams on the beach of Swachel, another one of my Chumash villages of origin, which is located on the far eastern end of the island of Lemieux, or what we call today Santa Cruz Island. Lizard was nearby. The light of the poppies back of the village attracted Lizard to discover the source of that which lights the world. Lizard saw the serenity of the world and played on his flute. The 4 holes of the flute were the voice of the world. Coyote was attracted by the sound. The two had never met. Lizard told Coyote that he had heard of him, and he wanted to ask him something. He said, "I've been told that you move in the sphere of Hutash, the earth goddess. Tell me, Coyote, what have you seen?" Coyote replied, "I have seen the game of Gomi," which is a kickball race, between turtle and hawk on Hutash Day, winter solstice. The Wote, the leader of Hutash, ordered the game to be played, and all the world came to his convocation. Turtle and hawk were to run about the world, and he who got beat was to be burned alive, and so also his sponsor. Then Turtle, in the name of all the world in Hutash, selected Coyote as his sponsor, and Coyote could not refuse. At the finish line, the ball of Turtle came in first, and then there was a debate about who won. Coyote explained, "Hawk was distracted by desire, so he lost." "How do you prove that Turtle won the race?" someone asked. Coyote replied, "Hawk came, and no ball has come. Sentiment enters before the living being. Turtle had a clear conscience. Nothing equals a bad conscience for making inutility in the world." Lizard then said that the ball was the idea, or knowledge, or conscience, and was followed by the creation of the soul. He said, as long as there is someone to support falsehood, things will not go well in the world. Coyote agreed. Truth will always predominate the world over. A review of our traditional knowledge, like this story, reveals that honesty in truth-telling is one of the, if not the most important virtues of the Chumash peoples. And I gather the same is true of other Indians and also of other cultures. The truth matters. An apology from the state of California or from the Catholic Church, for example, means little if it does not first acknowledge the truth. Every Indigenous Peoples' Day proclamation and land acknowledgement statement, every effort toward healing and reconciliation, any kind of restitution, restorative justice, reparation, or repatriation requires first an accurate account of history. In addition, our present and future have been shaped by our past. One of those truths is that Spanish colonization was the single most disastrous event in the history of the California Indians along the coast from Sonoma to San Diego. Granted, it was a 65-year event where on average 1,000 natives died every year from 1769 until the close of the missions in 1834. 75% of California Indians baptized at the missions met with an untimely death. Whether you were born at the missions or baptized at the age of 25, average life expectancy was only 9 years. At the missions in the San Francisco Bay Area, where our Rome Tucheloni ancestors are from, and where I work, Average life expectancy was less than 4.5 years after baptism. And Mission San Jose, by the way, was the worst. 4 years on average after you were baptized, you were dead. Slide. So one of the things that was lost was the future possibility of receiving federal recognition, as this map shows. And this is one of my favorite maps to show when I speak because it explains so much. If you look at the hard line in the shaded area, that's what we refer to as the line or the zone of complete missionization. And within that zone of complete missionization, from Sonoma to San Diego, today, there are fewer than 5 federally recognized tribes, which means the majority of us in that zone of complete missionization are not federally recognized. And moreover, we are not eligible for federal recognition because we don't have what the federal government calls continuity in these 3 ways. So for those of us who are interested in federal recognition, it is a near impossibility and takes many, many years and a whole lot of money to gain. Still, there are people who are continuing to try for those who want it, but this map is very telling of one of the serious consequences of missionization in California, and the fact that the federal government just did not take the situation in California into consideration when it created its criteria for federal recognition. For far too long, California Indian voices, our perspectives, our experiences and knowledge have been marginalized, limited, or missing from accounts of this history. We are grateful for the contributions of previous Native scholars like Edward Castillo, and for allies like the obscure Sherber and Cook, who was far more systematic in his methodological approach than many of his contemporaries, and who was often also very right. They're intervening in the conventional narrative as solidified by stalwart pro-Catholic authors like Zephyrin Engelhardt, Francis Guest, and Maynard Geiger, inspired many of us to continue to challenge the conventional narrative. The truth about Spanish colonization, the so-called mission period, we can include the Mexicans in that as well, has yet to be truthfully and fully told. Sorry, I lost my place for a second here. The inherent biases in the romantic myths or the fantasy heritage of the mission period with its inherent Christian and European biases distorts the truth of history and requires intervention by the peoples historically excluded from the telling of the so-called truth. We, California Indian scholars of all kinds, not just those of us with higher degrees in education, but our elders, our leaders, and our not so average members. Our allies are obviously also welcome too. But let it not be simply a telling of our competing alternative truth. We do not need to fall into the same fallacies as our pro-Catholic counterparts, whom selectively choose facts that confirm their biases. We have to do better. Otherwise, it's a stalemate. Their truth versus our truth. We have to continue to critically examine and dismantle their so-called truth claims while we provide our more accurate and intellectually sound accounts. Let me illustrate these 2 points about bias and competing truth claims, and this will give you some sense of what we have been up against over the course of time. Next slide, please. The quotation on the right is from a recently published journal article. This is a pro-Catholic author who wrote, if we recall, that the missionary stipend was 800 pesos, 400 for each missionary, then it emerges that far from exploiting Indians in these early years, missionaries actually transferred from 1/4 to 1/2 of their stipend to the native congregation. Putting aside the attribution of generosity, what's wrong with the implication that California Indians were fairly compensated for their labor? What is conspicuously missing from this analysis? The answer, seemingly everything, including the amount of the so-called compensation per Indian. Next slide. So here are a few facts. I'll get to these in a minute. 99% of these so-called funds that constituted compensation never made it into the actual hands of California Indians, but were placed in the common fund of the mission as credit. Those funds were entirely controlled by the missionaries. On average, each individual Native person hypothetically received less than 2 pesos for a year's labor. You can see the numbers here for various missions in various years. Of the less than 2 pesos per year per person, 50% of that was spent on mandatory clothing, 25% was spent on religious objects, and 24% was spent on tools. And only 1% was spent on beads. And you all know as well as I do that beads are currency in Native society, but none of the other objects that were purchased constitute compensation. In other words, each individual Native person received 1% of less than 2 pesos as compensation for a year's labor. Oh, and by the way, it was forced labor. If you did not work, you received 20 lashes. Next slide. Why does this matter, this little fact in this article? And it matters because this article was reviewed by over 20 scholars and received 2 awards. And its main argument, which is not this little paragraph that we read, was just as severely methodologically flawed. How that got by 20 folks with PhDs, I have no idea. Second, in regards to competing truths, I offer this. During the Sarah statue controversy in Ventura, it was suggested that instead of removing the Sarah statue in front of City Hall, that a Chumash statue be placed at the opposite end of the street. The assumption was, of course, that that would be a fair solution. Aside from the fact that we Native peoples don't do statues, the real issue was not simply with the honoring of Sarah, but with the narrative that justified his honoring in the first place. One source of false information was in plain sight on the accompanying plaque on the plinth of the statue, which stated that Sarah founded 9 missions in California. He only founded 6. Sarah did not walk from Monterey to Mexico City on a bad leg to acquire a Bill of Rights for California Indians. He did not learn a native language. He was not an environmentalist. He did not fight the colonial system. He was a part of it. Sarah was a colonizer of Native peoples, and the mission system he is credited with founding nearly completely destroyed Native peoples and culture in about 1/5 of the present state of California. Why falsehood after falsehood? There are likely many reasons. One may well be that for pro-Catholic supporters, the salvation of souls justifies every possible negative consequence of colonization. But the idea that the Franciscans saved the souls of the natives is a myth. The fact is that for every 100 natives baptized at the missions, less than 4 were genuinely converted, and over 75 died an untimely death. Yet when the negative consequences of colonization are put forward, pro-Catholic scholars and supporters pile on yet more misleading, irrelevant, and false information to defend the foundational assumption of conversion and hence salvation. When compounded by the utter lack of accountability, especially within the Catholic Church itself, the falsehoods become part of the rhetorical repertoire of pro-Catholic supporters and scholars. The familiar scripts constitute what we call moves to innocence. What is most striking, however, is the denial of colonization. So let's look at some historical facts related to the 3 not necessarily linear stages of settler colonialism: conquest, colonization/evangelization, and settlement. And it all begins with an oak tree along the coast in Rumson Territory. Slide, please. Did you know that the first Portola expedition in California actually missed its primary objective? After returning to San Diego, Portola headed back up the coast to Monterey. where he and Junipero Serra effectively bookmarked the land from San Diego to Monterey. But the story actually begins about 200 years earlier. In 1602, Sebastian Vizcaino landed at this spot in Rumsen territory in Monterey Bay, hung a bell from the branches of this oak tree, and held mass. On June 3rd, 1770, which in my opinion is the most important date in California Indian history up to that point, Junipero Serra hung bells from the branches of the same oak tree, put on his alb and stole, and held mass. Afterward, Gaspar de Portola, then governor of California and commander of the military, raised the royal standard, threw soil in 4 directions, and claimed that portion of Alta California from Monterey to San Diego in the name of the Spanish king. Soon thereafter, the Franciscans founded Mission San Carlos. By definition, that ceremony of possession constituted an act of conquest by means of international law, or in this case, the European right of first discovery. Slide. When the tree fell down in around 1900, the Franciscans picked it up and moved it into the grounds at Mission San Carlos, and it's still there today. Next slide. So I want to just take a minute to look at these 3 stages of settler colonialism, if we can call them that, to get started here. And I just want to review them to, of course, continue making my point. The first stage in settler colonialism, aside from the Spanish conquest, which is first, so I should say second here, was the founding of the Spanish missions in order to begin the process of removing native peoples from their lands, exploiting their labor, converting them to Christianity, assimilating them into Spanish culture, what we call Hispanicization, subjugating them into the social structure, all in an effort to create civilized, productive, and self-governing native peoples in the service of the Spanish crown. By definition, that is colonization. Historically, however, much of the pro-Catholic conventional scholarship on the missions emphasizes evangelization over and above colonization. In fact, the writing of much of the conventional literature, in the writing of much of the conventional literature, the term colonization refers to the settlement of vacated lands by colonists from Mexico and not to the practices of the missionaries. Next slide. The Spanish approach to colonization was called reducción, or reduction. A reducción is an Indian community set up under ecclesiastical and or royal authority to facilitate colonization. The primary vehicles for the colonization of native peoples were the Franciscan missions. The primary agents of colonization were the Franciscan missionaries. They were ultimately responsible for everything that happened in the missions. And that was the real reason why Serra went down to Mexico in 1773 to get that so-called Bill of Rights. Instead, what he wanted was to regain total control of the missions. Next slide. The removal of native peoples from their land was accompanied by a whole set of social structures or institutions like the Spanish economy, religion, culture, political systems, and laws. Mexican structures replaced Spanish, and American structures replaced Mexican. In each era, the inherently racist and coercive colonial practices continued to maintain the subjugation of native peoples. It is what we mean when we say that colonialism is an ongoing process. It is not something that just happened in the past. The third stage is settlement by migrant colonists, and that is made possible, of course, by the removal of native peoples from their ancestral land and their economic exploitation by settler colonists to facilitate their own economic growth, the colonists' economic growth. For the Spanish, land and labor were inexorably linked. And it's an important point here to remember that, especially in the Americas, that native peoples are always in the way of someone else's so-called progress. I have much more to say, but I have a question for the folks who somehow seem to think that our ancestors welcomed colonization. How did the missions benefit California Indians in a way that somehow justifies or makes worthwhile their physical and sexual abuse, their enslavement, and if you don't like the word enslavement, then their economic exploitation, the loss of land, the severe loss of life, the near complete eradication of our culture, our languages, and our communities? Let me just sum things up here. In conclusion, it was colonization, period, full stop. Does anyone really want to be colonized? The history of the mission period should not be based on good intentions, espoused principles, and the cherry picking of historical facts that confirm a pre-existing bias, while ignoring the fact of and disastrous consequences of colonization. We have to demand better. Better begins with the inclusion of indigenous voices. I am reminded of the various writings on indigenous epistemology, and especially feminist epistemology, in particular the writing of one of my favorite authors, Donna Haraway, who once wrote that knowledge projects should be constructed from the vantage points of the subjugated, because, as she says, there is good reason to believe that vision is better from below the brilliant space platforms of the powerful. I'll read that again. There is good reason to believe vision is better from below the brilliant space platforms of the powerful. We hope that in great part the various forms of scholarship produced by the variety of Native scholars in this critical mission studies grant, number one, add to the study of the California Indian and Spanish relations during the mission period, and two, critically interrogates previous scholarship in an effort to attain a more full and accurate account of the mission period and its consequences. Why? Because as Coyote and Lizard reminded us, things will not go well unless the truth prevails. Slide. Toward the end of their conversation, Lizard asked Coyote, "What can we do to see things more clearly?" Coyote replied, "Go and look in the mirror of the sea. The clear light of the sun on the sea is a mirror that enables you to see clearly all that is within you." Thank you. Yeah, we can.
So we have some time for questions. We have some time for questions, and I can move this around. Yep.
And I left a lot out.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Did you find, in any of your research, the zone that you mentioned earlier in the presentation? Were there commonalities amongst the few tribes that did end up being federally recognized that may have aided to them being federally recognized? Because it's strange, out of all of those tribes, that there's only, I only saw two, maybe Grayton and
St. Inez.
and San Ynez.
Yeah, and then where's Stan? Stan, down here in Kumeyaay territory, or he's on the phone. But down here in Kumeyaay territory, at Mission San Luis Rey in San Diego, things were a little bit different because the native peoples couldn't be brought to the missions because there wasn't enough food to support them, so they remained in their villages. I don't know, does that explain why there are more federally recognized tribes down in this area of Southern California than we might find elsewhere up the coast?
We fought back. Down the missions. We resisted. And it wasn't just here in San Diego, it was also in La Misión in Baja and Santa Catarina, and there were two missions on the Colorado River.
And you'll talk about that tomorrow, I'm assuming. Yeah, so there are reasons why there are some differences, but really that area north of San Diego all the way to Sonoma was the sort of standard in California, and down here things were different. And they'll explain that in the morning tomorrow. Yeah, thank you for the question. I'll share with you some facts if you don't have any questions. Go ahead, Val.
You mentioned the mission at San Carlos in Carmel. Have you looked directly across the street from the Presidio? There's a mission church there. And our oral stories tell us that that's where the mission originally was. But being directly across the street from the Presidio, that the soldiers would just go across the street there and just rape women, full time. And that's why they moved that mission there from Monterey, because there was a mission in Monterey. That's why they moved it from Monterey to Carmel. And that is the story that is within our tribe, and we do have ties to Carmel as well.
Yeah. Yeah, there are a lot of stories that just haven't been told. And one of those is this. I'm doing some research now, and I'm trying to calculate the reports of abuse by Spanish missionaries, and also the reports of sexual assault by Spanish missionaries. And I haven't got all the data finished yet, but it's turning out to look like 1 in 10 Franciscan missionaries either physically or sexually abused Native peoples. 1 in 10. There's this just incredible story, and I mean incredible in a bad way. There's this incredible story at Mission San Buenaventura where the Franciscan missionary walks into the monjeria, right, the female dormitory, taps the head nun on the shoulder. She starts singing a song, and the padre walks down, the aisle, so to speak, and picks out a woman or a girl and rapes her while they're singing a Catholic hymn. And that kind of information are in the Harrington notes, and they're stories that get passed down to us. You'll never find those stories really ever published in books. There's another little bit of research I'm doing is trying to calculate the number of, or percentage of California Indians who received instruction in their native language. Because that's one of the promises, that was actually one of the requirements of the Franciscan missionaries. And believe it or not, the data in the Huntington database allows you to identify the percentage of Native peoples who were actually able to learn Spanish. And from other records, like Martin Geiger's book on the Franciscan missionaries, you can actually figure out which Franciscan missionaries actually learned a native language. You can find out what missions they were at, and then because there were on average, three different groups, or 3 different languages spoken at every mission, then those Native peoples who listened to these sermons would have been cut roughly in about third. And it's going to end up, I'm still doing the math, but it's going to end up being less than 1/4. So how can you become converted, right, to Catholicism if you really don't even understand what you're being taught? Because they were taught in primarily in Spanish, Castilian Spanish, so and sometimes in Latin. So this is the thing I didn't get to in my presentation. There's so much work to do still. There are so many questions that still need to be answered. There's a lot of information out there. With this project, we got a good chunk of it done. There's been a lot that's been done before too, but there's just still so much work to do. Caroline?
I just wanted to point out that I believe that one of the ways that they captured us or got our attention was because these Catholic hymns, they hum like birdsong. I mean, it has the same tune, a lot of them. Then they have the cherubs with wings. We're bird people. It was very calculated how they worked our own ways into their system. But if you listen to some of the Catholic, Hail Mary, Mother of God, if you listen to that, it sounds like the same tune as birdsong, as some of the bird singers. So that's my thought.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jonathan. I've been thinking a lot about even the title here on the front here, From Truth-Telling to Healing. And lately I've been thinking a lot about the concept of reckoning, okay? And I see a linear projection, a linear development, that there is something happening. I mean, I just saw the thing about Hastings Law School, being him being taken down, which to me is a wonderful development based on what a investigative reporter came up with, and now it's changed. I see the bells coming down. I see the statues coming down, and maybe I'm getting ahead of myself, but I just want to see that happen. I want to see, as a former Franciscan, I would like to see that unceded land ceded. I would like to see the friar, actually back in the 60s, the Franciscans got a piece of land up somewhere in central California and donated it to the tribe there. I think it was San Antonio Mission. But that's what I want to see. And healing, of course, that comes along with it. But what are your thoughts on that, Jonathan? Do you think things are, I mean, I doubt if I'll ever see anything in my lifetime. I'd like to, but will some of us, will we see some, that ice breaking and see something really happen?
Absolutely, yes. I mean, the terrible history aside, we're not victims, right? Suit up and let's go. And we've seen major changes just in the last 2 years. It's if you haven't noticed, the racial justice movement in the United States translated in great part in California to an increased concern and attention to California Indians and our tragic history. And in the work that I do up in the San Francisco Bay Area, we are just absolutely overwhelmed. And we have been getting offers for land. But we can't fall victim to the ideal of land back and rematriation. And let me explain what I mean. Decolonization has as its primary objective the rematriation of land, because colonialism, for the folks who write about decolonization, was defined primarily by the removal of native peoples from their land. And I totally get that. But if you gave me back 1,000 acres today, I would say no, because I do not have the financial, legal, and human resources necessary to manage that land over the course of time. So if we talk a lot about land back and rematriation, but it is an ideal. And in reality, we need capacity to go along with the giving back of that land. It would become a literal burden to me if somebody gave me 1,000 acres. So and by the way, oftentimes land back comes from people who are non-native, right? Give the land back. The decision to receive land back is ours to make. Other people should not be making those decisions for us. Some people want it, some people don't, right? But those are our decisions to make. And when as a non-native person, you make a decision that you believe is in the best interest of a native person without consulting them, that air of superiority is inherently racist. It's not overtly racist, but it's still nonetheless racist. And so we have to be very careful. Another thing that I want to say, right? I remember I'm the chair of a tribe and the executive director of our foundation. We do a lot of work. But one of the things that is really interesting about this particular point in history is people are asking us what we want. And we've heard that question over the course of many years. But now, Mark, it's for real. Like, people are really genuinely, seriously asking us, what do you want? And they're prepared to give it. When they asked me, I'm working with an estate. They have 80 acres. They want to give some of it back. And their question to me is, what would you do with it? And I'm like, I have no idea. Because no one has ever asked me that question for reals, to use 8th grade language here, right? No one's ever asked me that question for reals. So what is my response? I have to say, you know what? As a native person, I would have to go and be with that land and let the land, right, let Mother Earth tell me what she wants us to do with it. In other words, I can't answer your question until I spend time on that property and listen. So it's a really interesting moment to be in. There's a tremendous amount of progress made. We, for example, we decided not to tear down the Portola and Sarah statues in San Mateo County, and instead we wrote a letter to the Department of Transportation, right, Caltrans, and asked them to remove the statues. It's COVID, right? Everything takes forever. A year later, finally, they came back and said yes. But that's not the real victory. The real victory is that our patience with the state of California has given them time to create a racial and equity committee that has a set of policies and procedures and resources to be able to handle complaints like ours for groups like ours in the future. In other words, changing the social structures of the state for us was far more important than the symbolic act of tearing down statues. And it's paid off because right now the state is listening. I'll overstate this, but nobody is saying no to California Indians right now. And so please, let's take advantage of it. We don't know how long this is going to last, but the work that we do should be geared toward putting permanent structures in place that will benefit us in the future if and when the trend ends, right? So we have to be smart about this. Yeah. Jennifer, I know we're over time. Okay, we can keep going. But thanks for your question, and it's good to see you.
Notung Amy, my name is Amy. Non Pam Koish, I'm Pam Koicham. I have a lot of things that I would ask, but one of the forefront is you put up the BIA requirements for federal recognition. Why doesn't the BIA just change the policies? I'm always curious, like, what is the pushback on that? Because we do education advocacy where we're from for our indigenous youth, in having them being treated equitably and holding schools accountable. So we're always like, what is the pushback on changing this policy? So is it that they're afraid of natives, I don't know, getting land? Or, you know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah.
What is the major? Because I haven't been in a space like this where I can really ask why the BIA doesn't advocate for the changing of these policies.
Well, we have a person in a position of power within the BIA who certainly has the capacity to push that change forward. Honestly, I can only guess at the answers. And one is, usually when you get federal recognition, you get a parcel of land. These things are going to cost the federal government money if more people are processing, requests for federal recognition. I'm sure there are a whole host of other reasons. Does anybody else want to chime in on that?
I always think, school districts don't want Native children to be educated because they're afraid we're going to kick them off our homelands, or that it'll get to that point, right? Like that's the ultimate fear for being unwilling to provide access to our young people. So I'm just curious.
Yeah, Val, go ahead.
The truth is that the BIA. Oh, sorry. Another truth is that the BIA, the vast majority of employees are from recognized tribes. And if additional tribes get recognized, it just cuts that budget for transportation, for housing, for schooling, for medical infrastructure, et cetera. It just cuts it cuts into their budget, and their share gets smaller and smaller and smaller. I attended a committee meeting, a Senate committee meeting on the Lumbee tribe. And they were going for federal recognition. And this one tribe, I won't say their name, this one tribe, they came in with bus loads at 5 a.m. And they all stood at the door. When those doors opened, they went in and they filled all the chairs in that conference room. And when the Lumbee got there later, they were all outside the room. They couldn't be inside for the hearings. And every time they said anything in support of recognition, there was boos and jeers. At the same time, if they said anything opposed to recognition, they would cheer loudly and stuff like that. A lot of recognized tribes do not support that. They do not want additional tribes, for fear of having their resources cut. And then here in California, the casinos tribes, I've been told this directly by a tribal leader, that they will not support it because they don't want to interfere with their client base. And that, those are just hard truths.
Yeah.
And then finally on federal recognition, we signed a treaty. A lot of people don't know it, but we signed a treaty. We signed a treaty in 1851. Those are the California treaties. And what the treaty we signed was going to give 7.5 million acres spread north to south to quite a few tribes, probably about 80, 90 tribes. We signed, the treaty was signed, the commissioners signed that treaty. It went to Washington, D.C. to be ratified. The state of California passed a resolution asking the president and the U.S. Senate to not ratify the treaty. And then that treaty right there, then they sent a lobbying delegation to lobby against it. And that's whenever the president of the United States ordered that treaty be sealed. And that treaty was sealed for 50 years. So we did sign a treaty, but it was just sabotaged by the state of California. And I just thought I'd put that out there because that whole issue of federal recognition is a hard one. The last tribe to get recognized, well, one of the last tribes. It took them 22 years and $88 million. Who the heck has that kind of money? I can tell you our tribe doesn't.
Yeah, other questions, comments? All right, well then let's have dinner.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I apologize. I forgot to say thank you to the audience that is out there somewhere. So thank you all for tuning in, and hopefully we'll see you next time.